Hello Internet, and welcome to my second video in the series I'm doing about my American road trips and the experiences we had during those trips and things to see. Today we will be leaving Cherokee in North Carolina and moving south to Charleston over a couple of days. And I will, as well, of course, talk to you about things that are worth seeing on that particular trip, or at least as we took it back in 2000. So, yeah, enjoy. The day we were supposed to leave Cherokee, the family split up in several groups. My family and my grandparents was going one way to our daily stop at Hendersonville, but my uncle and aunt and cousins had to go to Asheville Airport in order to get my uncle's luggage, who had been lost on the original trip over. So, for the first time, we didn't drive together. We left Cherokee after doing a little more sightseeing in the town, but again, honestly, as I've mentioned before, it's unless you're there to play in the casinos, it is mostly a tourist trap without much to get on about. This particular day, there isn't that much to talk about. As I mentioned before, members of the family had a desire to get to the hotels we are using fairly early so they could have a chance to go into the pool and get some sun next to it and so on. We did, however, drive through the Great Smoky Mountains for the first time during this trip, a part of the Blue Ridge line at the Appalachians, and honestly, it's one of the most amazing driving areas around. Later on the trip, we would have our first experience with the Blue Ridge Parkway, which I will get back to. But even down here, just driving through the mountain of blue smoke, as the Cherokees call it, with the very low hanging clouds nearly clinging to the mountain sides, is a very beautiful natural area to go through, and something which we, of course, did not in any way have in Denmark. About Hendersonville itself, there isn't much to say. We didn't really see much of the city, and what we saw was fairly average, somewhat normal. It was still exciting for us because it was our first time in the United States, so everything was new and exciting, or at least it was for us children. But today, I would consider Hendersonville one of the more dreary places I have stayed. We were, however, having a certain kind of experience. For the first time in America, or in our American history, if you want to call it that, we ate breakfast at a Denny's. Now, I have eaten breakfast at Denny's several times later, but however, this was the first time and the very first time we ate at an American breakfast restaurant, and honestly, the mere fact that I could get Belgian waffles with ice cream and some whipped cream and bacon and sausages all mixed up in one endeared me quite to the nation of America, even if I even then felt it was a bit odd. Later, of course, I would learn of my lactose intolerance, so I have not been able to try that particular mixture again, so much for the better, I feel. The rest of the day was to be taken up by driving south to the small town or village nearly of Santee in South Carolina, from which we would explore and experience Charleston. On the way, again, we were driving with my grandparents, and we decided to take a look at something called Natural Chimney or Chimney Rock, which is basically a rock in a park. It's a sort of hard rock dome standing apart from the rest of the mountainside, and we wanted to see that. There should be an amazing view from there, where you can on a clear day actually see Grandfather Mountain almost 80 miles away. So we went there, and we went through the drill tunnel to the elevator shaft going up. You can walk upstairs on the outside of the mountain. However, even back then, I was way too lazy to get even remotely involved with that. The bored rock tunnel to the elevator shaft is always a balmy about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So if any of you desires to visit, which I strongly suggest you should, as it is, as I've heard, a wonderful place when it isn't foggy, Well, I might be getting ahead of myself here, but as you can see on the picture, it was absolutely awfully misty while we were there. The thing about seeing Grandfather Mountain 80 miles away, no, we were lucky if we could see stuff 8 feet away. It was interesting anyway. The usual elevator went up to a gift shop, as such things do, and from there you can walk out on the rock and see what you can see. Again, my parents have been there later, and they say that in clear weather it is an amazing place to visit. It is an amazing sight. You get an astonishing view over the foothills of the Appalachians and the Carolina Piedmont towards the ocean, and I would advise anyone to go visit it, as it is fairly cheap to get up there, and well, again, you can get some good exercise by walking, even if you decide to leave the elevator alone. It was, however, after Chimney Rock we had our first, not scare, but a bit of surprise in the United States. Back then we didn't have GPS, and we navigated by card. And we map, I suppose, and we navigated wrongly. So eventually we lost sort of an idea of where we were and get further and further into the North Carolinian wilderness. Eventually we managed to find a post office and happily pulled up in order to ask if they could get us help to get back to where we wanted to go. But no, it was closed. So, yeah, everything else in the same little town was also closed, so we were at our wits' end at this point, and were convinced that maybe we just have to drive around and hope for the best, when some gentleman drove up in his truck, and we managed to pull him over and ask the way to the motorway. And, of course, he helped us, and we got back to it. That was very nice of him. This was the first experience my family had of getting lost on smaller American roads, though a couple of days later it would get even worse, as I will get back to later in this video. Now, I have done this a couple of times later, and of course the first time was fairly scary because, okay, we weren't perhaps that fluent in English at the time, we didn't know the customs, we didn't know if you could just pull people over and ask. It was the first time we were there. Today we would have been a lot more confident, and again, honestly, sometime today I would say me and my dad has several times just done we're lost, that's a good thing, let's go see stuff we otherwise wouldn't get to see and find out where it takes us. You can't, after all, get lost if you don't have anywhere to go, so you get to see a lot of stuff. I would advise, however, people doing road trips to have a GPS on hand, just in case you need to find something you don't know exactly where is. The next day we were going to visit Charleston. Charleston, South Carolina has become one of my favorite towns or cities really, for history and architecture. But first we were to visit Boone Hall Plantation. Now, I've already talked about Boone Hall in one of my 5 places to see videos, so I won't say much about it here and instead advise you to go watch that one. It's enough to mention that the 80s television series North and South was filmed here, at least to a certain degree filmed here, and since my sister and mother was great fans of that, they wanted to go and see it. It's a fairly interesting place, still working plantation actually, though not cotton anymore. However, as I said, go watch my previous videos and go watch Boone Hall, which is absolutely worth a visit. Following the plantation visit, we went into Charleston itself. Charleston, a town who has in many ways become one of my favorite places to visit in the southeastern states, so I apologize if this basically sounds like a tourist advertising for that place. But it is absolutely amazing, and I don't see how anyone can pass through South Carolina or even just vacationing in South Carolina without taking time to see Charleston. And it's possibly the best collection in the South of antebellum houses and old 18th century stuff. Anyway, we arrived in the city and found a parking place where we could put our car and bought our ticket to take the city trolley around, which back then was $2 for as much as you wanted to ride during the day. Yeah, take that, Danish transportation ministry. You could learn something here. It's a very interesting town. Charleston is formed, as the Charlestonians themselves say, where the Cooper and Ashley River combines to form the Atlantic Ocean. It's always good to be a tad modest about your hometown. It is, like I said, one of the largest collections of old pre-Civil War houses and buildings in the American South. And of course, the history is that this was basically where the Civil War started, when cadets from the town Citadel opened fire on the Star of the West and later on the northern forces at Fort Sumter. We walked around a bit, but the weather turned a bit sour. It started to rain, so we, for the first time, went in to get a decent lunch at a burger place. The first real burger restaurant we visited in the United States, and thus the first American-style burger I've ever had. It was a Wild Wings next to the Market Square in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, later I have had better burgers. However, this was the first one I've had of the American sort of real burger style that isn't Burger King or McDonald's or stuff like that. And to this day, it still stays with me. A bourbon sauce, something whiskey, something burger. I can't even remember what it was. It's just, it still stands for me as the epitome of what burger food should be, even if I have actually had better later. So, yeah, that's... There you go. We also visited the peanut shop, which is a basic, well, it's basically an entire shop just selling peanuts of various varieties. Of course, if you have a nut allergy, I would suggest you stay out of it. After lunch, we then took a walk down to the Battery Park down at the southern edges of the peninsula Charleston is placed on. However, this was when my mood started souring a bit, and I didn't get as much out of this particular walk as I later would, because it had become warm. It had become 110 Fahrenheit, the hottest thing we experienced on that trip. Now, I have gotten more used to that later, but on the first trip to America, that was very hot, especially with moisture around 98% following the rain. So I got a bit pissy. Let's just say that. I threw a couple of hissy fits on the way and certainly didn't experience the town to the degree that I should have, and fortunately later have. And eventually, I don't know if it was the weather or my unfortunate mood, but the family decided to return to the car and return to Santee. Now, this was where we got our first surprise of the day, because when we returned to the parking lot, we hadn't really discovered the closing time, so it appeared that it had closed about half an hour before we got back there. So, yeah, what were we going to do? Fortunately, before we had to, stay in town over the night, we did manage to locate a very kind lady who unlocked the gate so we could get the car out. That was the first surprise of that particular trip back to Santee. It would get worse. Now, there are a couple of ways to get from Charleston to Santee. The easiest way is to go all the way on the motorway. And had we done that, we would probably have arrived there without any stories to tell and without any kind of, scared experiences. However, we decided to take South Carolina Route 6 because it looked like it followed a couple of lakes in the country. And my family liked driving next to water. I mean, who doesn't? And we eventually found Route 6 fairly easily enough and drove up that towards Santee and towards the lakes. Unfortunately, those lakes are hidden behind a bunch of trees, so the whole thing was rather pointless, and then the problem started. We arrived at a T-crossing, and according to the map we were following, there was no T-crossing. We were just supposed to drive straight ahead. Now, obviously, straight ahead was one of those two T-crossing sections, but we didn't know which one, and yeah, as you can imagine, we took the wrong one. So, once again, we were lost, this time in the desolate wasteland of rural South Carolina, which of course isn't desolate at all. The next problem was that the light in our car started telling us that we were very seriously out of gas. The third problem was that we didn't really have any money. So, yeah, we were lost. We didn't have any gas. We couldn't find a gas station. And even if we found a gas station, we didn't even know if we could pay for things. That was probably the single most frightening moment at the trip because, of course, we didn't have cell phones either. This was 2000, and Danish cell phones certainly didn't work in the United States. Eventually, when we were just about ready to give up, we did, however, locate a gas station, more specifically the one pictured here. This picture, however, is from 2012 when we returned to the area. Back then, there was I think, one filling station, and the store itself looked a bit more dilapidated. We did, however, manage to scrape together, I think, about $15 because they certainly didn't take credit cards there, and managed to fill up the car enough to get on with it with helpful advice from the local gas station attendant to perhaps ask for directions along the way back to Santee. We did that by stopping a car full of elderly ladies, black ladies, if that has any value to you, who looked really scared about these bunch of weird fat Danish people holding them up on the side of the road. But eventually they just realized we wanted directions and helpfully guided us back to Santee. So yeah. We had gotten lost, only managed to get on with it by absolute skin of our teeth, since we actually filled up the car with more gas than there was supposed to be in the tank, so we were literally running on fumes at the time. But hey, that's road tripping. That's exactly what road tripping is. Experience you wouldn't have in any other way. Eventually we got back to Santee and joined the rest of the family who had wisely taken the motorway in the pool area and spent the rest of the day there. Now, before I end this particular trip, I want to tell one small anecdote. My grandfather had been in the area back in 1962, and there he had bought some homemade weaved basket by some nice lady sitting on the roadside outside of Charleston, and he definitely wanted to get one of those again. So this year and 2 years later, when my parents and grandparents were there without me and my sister, they were looking for those women that he certainly knew were sitting there selling these weaved baskets. They never found them. Strangely enough, in 40 years, the ladies had decided to go home. You can't trust anybody. Though eventually they did find some basket weavers inside Charleston themselves, and of course they had now a very effective advertising tool, since this gentleman had bought a basket 40 years earlier, it had lasted for 40 years, and now he was back. So, yeah. Well, we were in Santee, we were safe, and we were ready to head north towards Washington. That was it. The second travel diary from my first trip to the United States. Now, I admit these first videos might be a bit boring, or at least a little bit more boring than what will come later, since, well, it's been 70 years, memories do tend to fade a little bit, and of course, the fact that we mostly had to be back at the hotel to join up with a lot of other people, and we were running a fairly strict route, meant that a lot of the road trip experiences that I've had on later trips were not really happening on this one. Though, of course, the getting lost on the way back to Santee was probably the biggest scare I've ever had on an American road, because, well, yeah, that was... However, I hope you enjoyed this. Next time I will take you to Washington, D.C. and beyond. So yeah, until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.